What if the woman once labeled the biggest bully in Hollywood just named someone else as the real villain? And this time, she brought receipts. For decades, fans thought they knew Lisa Rinna as the outspoken firecracker from the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, the one who never backed down from a fight, never held her tongue, and definitely never avoided drama. But long before the dinner table showdowns and reunion explosions, Rinna says she was dealing with something much darker behind the scenes. In her brand new memoir, she drops a bombshell about her time on Days of Our Lives in the 1990s, claiming that one of her most famous co-stars made her life a living hell. The twist? On screen, they were playing one of daytime TV's most passionate couples. Off camera, she says they couldn't stand each other. According to Rinna, if she didn't do exactly what he wanted, he'd freeze her out. Silent treatments, mind games, sudden mood swings. She describes him as a ticking time bomb, someone so unpredictable that she never knew which version of him she'd be forced to work with that day. And when another housewife once called her the biggest bully in Hollywood, Rinna didn't forget it. Now she's firing back, publicly naming her former co-star Robert Kelly as one of the real bullies in this town. But that's only the beginning of the story, because what was happening behind the cameras may completely change how fans see one of the most iconic soap pairings of the 90s. The romance may have looked electric on screen, but behind the cameras, Lisa Rinna says it felt like walking into a storm every single day. During her time on Days of Our Lives, Rinna was paired opposite Robert Kelly in one of the show's biggest storylines. Fans were invested. Their characters had passion, tension, heartbreak, everything a classic soap couple needed. But according to Rinna's new memoir, the off-screen reality was anything but romantic. She claims that working with him was unpredictable and emotionally draining. Some days, she says, he'd be perfectly pleasant. Other days, she'd arrive on set not knowing whether she'd be met with cold silence or quiet hostility. That uncertainty, she describes, was exhausting. And then there was what she calls the silent treatment. Rinna alleges that if she didn't approach a scene the way he preferred, he would simply shut down, refusing to engage beyond what was absolutely necessary. No confrontation. No discussion. Just distance. According to her, it felt like a power play. She even described him as a ticking time bomb, suggesting she never knew which version of her co-star she'd encounter. For someone working in a high-pressure environment where chemistry and timing matter, that kind of tension could turn every filming day into a guessing game. But here's what makes this even more intense. The audience had no idea. Viewers were watching what looked like one of the most believable couples in daytime television. Meanwhile, Rinna says she was navigating what felt like emotional landmines just to get through a scene. And if you think that was the worst of it, she claims the real issue wasn't just tension. It was something much more calculated. What she describes next goes beyond awkward tension. It starts sounding like strategy. In her memoir, Lisa Rinna claims the dynamic on set wasn't just uncomfortable, it felt calculated. She alleges that Robert Kelly would engage in what she calls passive-aggressive behavior and subtle mind games that left her constantly second-guessing herself. Instead of explosive arguments, she says it was quieter than that. A shift in tone. A withdrawn energy. A sudden coldness, without explanation. According to Rinna, it created an environment where she was always trying to read the room before a scene even began. Was he in a good mood? Was he upset about something? Had she unknowingly done something wrong? She claims she never really knew. And that unpredictability, she suggests, was the real problem. Not a single dramatic blow-up, but a pattern. A cycle. One day he'd be warm and cooperative. The next, distant and dismissive. She describes feeling like she was walking into a test she didn't know she'd signed up for. What makes it even more complicated is that soap operas move fast. There's little time for emotional recovery between takes. Long hours. Tight shooting schedules. Scenes packed with intensity. In that kind of environment, even subtle tension can feel amplified. Rinna implies that trying to perform romance on camera while navigating what she perceived as manipulation behind the scenes was draining in a way fans never saw. And yet, the cameras kept rolling. The love story continued. The chemistry looked real. Which raises the question, if the off-screen dynamic was this strained, how did they make it look so believable? Because what viewers were watching at home was something entirely different. To the audience, it looked like pure chemistry, passion, fire. The kind of romance that keeps soap fans glued to their screens for years. On Days of Our Lives, Billy and Beau were intense. Emotional confrontations, sweeping love scenes, breakups that felt devastating, makeup moments that felt earned. Viewers bought it completely. The pairing became a central storyline in the early 90s, and fans were invested in every twist. But according to Rinna, none of that reflected reality. She now says the affection was strictly for the cameras. Off-screen, she claims there was no warmth, only tension. In fact, she flat out states that behind the scenes, they hated each other. That's a strong word. And it completely flips the nostalgic image many longtime fans still have of that era. Think about that for a second. Millions of viewers believed they were watching two actors deeply in sync. Meanwhile, Rinna says she was pushing through scenes with someone she felt was making her life miserable. That kind of disconnect is jarring. It forces fans to question how much of what we see in entertainment is pure illusion. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Soap operas are masters of hiding real-life friction. Tight production schedules leave no room for personal drama to derail storylines. If two actors can't stand each other, they still have to sell a love story by 3 p.m. That pressure can either break performers or make them hyper-professional. Rinna suggests she chose professionalism. She showed up. She hit her marks. She delivered the romance audiences expected. But internally, she claims it was draining. And what makes this even more explosive is that she's not just revisiting an old feud for nostalgia's sake. She's connecting it to something much more recent and much more public. And this is where the story takes a sharp turn. Years after leaving Days of Our Lives, and long after becoming one of the most polarizing figures on the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, Rinna found herself on the receiving end of a label that stuck. During a heated Housewives moment, Kathy Hilton suggested that Rinna was the biggest bully in Hollywood. It was dramatic. It was quotable. And for many viewers, it reinforced the image of Rinna as the unapologetic instigator who pushes buttons and thrives on confrontation. But now, Rinna is firing back, and she's doing it in print. In her memoir, she directly references that accusation and flatly rejects it. Not true. Not even close, she insists. And then she drops the bombshell. She claims she has legit stories about the real bullies in this town. And she names one, Robert Kelker-Kelly. That's not subtle. That's not vague. That's a decades-old co-star being publicly called out as one of Hollywood's actual bullies. The timing is what makes this especially interesting. Rinna has built a reputation on being loud, blunt, and fearless. Critics say she dishes it but can't take it. Supporters argue she simply refuses to play fake. By connecting the bully label back to her soap opera days, she's essentially reframing her narrative. Instead of being the aggressor, she's positioning herself as someone who endured it first. And fans are split. Some believe this adds context, that maybe the tough exterior came from years of navigating difficult personalities behind the scenes. Others are skeptical, questioning why these claims are surfacing decades later. But whether you believe her or not, one thing is undeniable. This comment just reopened a Hollywood chapter many assumed was long buried. And the bigger question now is, why reveal it at this exact moment? So, why bring this up now after more than 30 years? That's the question everyone is asking. Rinna could have left the past exactly where it was, buried in old scripts and faded storylines from Days of Our Lives. Instead, she chose to put it in black and white inside her memoir, fully aware it would make headlines. Memoirs are strategic. They're not just confessionals, they're reputation resets. And Rinna knows how to control a narrative. After years of being painted as the villain on the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, this book feels like her opportunity to explain where that hardened edge came from. She's essentially saying, you saw the fire on reality TV, but you didn't see the pressure cooker that built it. There's also timing to consider. Rinna recently stepped away from Housewives, shifting her focus to new projects and reshaping her public image. With renewed attention from shows like The Traitors and a constant social media presence, interest in her past is peaking again. Dropping a behind-the-scenes bombshell now guarantees conversation. And let's be real, Hollywood runs on reinvention. A well-timed revelation can flip the script on years of criticism. By naming someone she claims was a bully, she's reframing herself not as the aggressor, but as someone who endured difficult behavior long before cameras followed her every move. Still, not everyone is convinced. Some fans are wondering why these accusations are resurfacing decades later. Was it about closure? About setting the record straight? Or about reclaiming control of a narrative that's followed her for years? Whatever the motivation, one thing is certain. Once a story like this is out, it doesn't quietly disappear. And now, all eyes are on what happens next. The moment those excerpts hit the internet, the reaction was instant. Clips of Lisa Rinna calling out her former co-star started circulating across social media, and fans wasted no time picking sides. Some praised her for finally speaking up about what she says happened behind the scenes on Days of Our Lives. Others weren't so quick to accept the story at face value. As of now, Robert Kelly hasn't publicly responded to the claims. Reports say media outlets reached out for comment, but there's been no official statement. And that silence? It's only fueling more speculation online. Supporters argue that just because something happened decades ago doesn't mean it didn't leave a mark. They say Hollywood in the 90s operated very differently, especially on fast-paced soap sets where actors were expected to power through anything. From that perspective, Rinna's story feels like overdue honesty. But critics are asking tougher questions. Why now? Why name him so directly? Is this about closure, or about keeping headlines alive during a new career chapter? On platforms like Reddit and X, the debates are heated. Some viewers say this adds depth to her Housewives persona. Others believe it's convenient timing. And then there's the broader conversation this sparked about what really happens behind the polished surface of television romance. If two actors can allegedly despise each other while convincingly playing soulmates, what else don't audiences see? What makes this situation especially compelling is the contrast. Rinna built a reputation for being outspoken, even confrontational. Now she's framing herself as someone who endured manipulation quietly for years. That shift in perspective changes how some fans interpret her entire career arc. But until Kelly addresses the claims, if he ever does, the story exists in that gray area where memoir meets memory. One person's truth, another person's silence. And in Hollywood, silence can be just as loud as a statement. Which leaves us with one final question. How many more behind-the-scenes stories are still waiting to surface? Hollywood loves a perfect love story. But what if some of the most iconic romances we've watched for decades were built on tension no one ever saw? Lisa Rinna's claims about her time on Days of Our Lives don't just reopen an old feud. They pull back the curtain on how the entertainment industry really works. Long hours, high pressure, massive egos, and a silent expectation that no matter what's happening behind the scenes, the show must go on. If what she describes is accurate, it raises a bigger issue. How many actors have powered through uncomfortable environments because speaking up wasn't an option? In the 90s especially, challenging a co-star, particularly on a hit series, could risk your career. So you smile, you hit your mark, you sell the romance, and you keep quiet. At the same time, it's important to remember this is one perspective. Robert Kelly has not publicly responded to the allegations, and without his side of the story, the full picture remains incomplete. Memoirs are deeply personal. They reflect memory, emotion, and interpretation, not necessarily a courtroom verdict. But whether you see this as long overdue honesty or perfectly timed controversy, one thing is undeniable. It forces fans to rethink what they thought they knew. The couple that looked inseparable on screen may have been worlds apart when the cameras stopped rolling. And maybe that's the real takeaway. In Hollywood, image is everything. Chemistry can be manufactured. Smiles can be rehearsed. Feuds can stay buried for decades until someone decides they're done staying silent. So the next time you watch a picture-perfect romance unfold on television, ask yourself, what story might be happening just outside the frame?